at it, or there have been misinterpretations. And so part of what we've been trying to do is to say, hold on, there are other ways of looking at these texts.
Right.
There are other questions that can come about, especially if one raises questions from different cultural perspectives. Part of the difficulty in historical criticism is that historical criticism was developed trying to show that the construction of ancient Israel and the construction of the early church modeled the rise of the Germanic state. Mm. So you got talking about Amphictyones, and you got talking about how Israel comes in to play, and it just models what fits there. And so when one comes with different questions, we've already seen the same thing happening when women start reading and are allowed or demand that they read the text with different eyes.
Right.
Same thing happened with African Americans, as we were interpreting text differently. And so part of the richness that can be contributed not only to biblical studies but also to the church is to see that there is no one way of reading these texts. And the question comes, from what perspective are we reading?
Right.
And from what lens are we reading? It's most intriguing in terms of my students who I get a lot of negative reaction from women when I start challenging patriarchal texts and patriarchal understandings in the text and patriarchal interpretations. And I understand what they're saying to me, and the objection is, hey, I want to get ordained, and I want to be in the club, and I want to get a church, and so don't give me this information about that when this God is presented as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Right.
That's an explicit statement that even though Abraham had a wife and two concubines and a slave, and even though Isaac has a wife, and even though Jacob has two wives and two slaves, he's sexually molesting, and so there are a bunch of women in there. This is a God of the men, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the question comes, if we believe that God is an equal opportunity God and loves women as much as men, then what do we do with these texts that essentially trash women? And so, those types of, when we raise those types of questions, that does get to be troubling. And one possibility is to say, well, I still hold on to my view that God loves women as much as men, and therefore, I would have to talk about a God of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, and because I can't leave the lower class folk out,
Right.
But generally, we have all been taught to read in a way that gets us to minimize these questions,
right.
And to pretend that the text isn't problematic at that point. I remember I was in a seminar in graduate school and it said, aren't you like the Ethiopians to me, Israel? And I said, excuse me, is this a positive or negative statement? I was taught to stop asking questions that were relevant to the seminar. So the disturbing has been going on for a while.
Right.
It's just that the Academy hasn't always allowed for the disturbers to be heard.
Right.
And to create the space for the disturbing stuff to be said. And to say, well, if one reads this in another way, one can do it. It's just that if we as African Americans are claiming, well, we're reading through this perspective, and the Asian Americans say, we're reading from this perspective, and Latinos say, the question comes, when are white folk going to say, what we're giving you is a white reading?
Right.
And claim that that's in fact, what's behind it.
Yeah.
part of the difficulty in the church and seminary level is that we still think there's only one way to read it, and that if we raise these other questions, we are in fact opening up a Pandora's box, as though God wouldn't be excited about, multiple readings and multiple possibilities and multiple, components, and interpretations. And the other thing is that all the centuries, texts have been read differently. Right. And there have been different emphases in various texts, and we have acted as though the one interpretation is always, has always stood,
right?
For centuries, which isn't necessarily, the case,
right?
And so, those possibilities, I think, have become richer. And what was interesting in this process was to see, for some folk, how difficult it became to retool, to allow oneself to ask, because women have all been trained to read as men.
Right.
LGBT folk have all been trained to read as straight folk. And when one sees possible, queer readings in the text, it's like, oh no, that couldn't be, and so to see opening up new possibilities, I think, we're giving a gift not only to the church but to the academy.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, folk don't like the gifts that they're given and try to re-gift.
It's happened to me. The Africana Bible, which was published around the same time, which you edit and contribute. Is this an extension of this, or is it coming from a different point of view?
It's designed to come from a different point of view. And on the one hand, we were intentional, and there's also a New Testament volume, but which is called True to Our Native Land. Mm-hmm. But there were differences in the direction New Testament folk wanted to go, and we were going. We wanted to be transgressive on the one hand, and we wanted to foreground African and Afro-diasporan culture.
Before you go on, can you explain being transgressive for us? That's from bell hooks, right?
Being transgressive is essentially breaking the rules and poking fun at stuff, but also going against the grain intentionally for a purpose of opening up, new possibilities.
Right.
And so, but also, we wanted to foreground what happens if we go to the biblical text and use African diasporan culture as a way of opening the text. And most of us have been trained to, do Eurocentric exegesis and then do some hermeneutical piece at the end.
Right.
And so, we have some exciting pieces in there with, there's one woman, Michelle Taylor. She was doing the Book of Numbers, and she was very upset with the Transjordanian wars and all the people that were being killed, but she thought senselessly. And I was editing the Pentateuchal section, so I said, why don't you use, and when it says war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And she used that as a way of reading Numbers.
Yeah.
She kept using that refrain,
yeah.
To do that. Marcosi, and one other difference is that we have in this volume people from the continent of Africa and from the Caribbean and from various parts of the diaspora, because we didn't want it just to be an African American production. And also we had Protestants and Catholics. And we did the deuterocanonical books because we didn't want to act like all black folk were Protestant. And so we Makosi Nzimanda, who is a Hebrew Bible scholar from South Africa, looks at, she does the book of Isaiah, and then starts questioning what's happening with the way in which women are treated in Isaiah, and would this, the way in which Isaiah deals with the nation, really be helpful for South African black women to, in fact, read this text, since their questions don't get addressed. Theodore Bao looks at David as a gangster, and looks at gangster rap as a way of understanding Samuel. I agree with Mickey Ball that the book of Judges is really about women who get killed or get raped, and it really isn't about the men, it's about the women who are associated with these men. So I use Nina Simone's song For Women as a way of reading the book of Judges, and who's Peaches and who's Sophronia, and who's Sweet Thing, in terms of the book. So in some ways, we were attempting to break out of the box, but also open up the text. So it's a mixed bag in that some writers were early in their career and felt that would be a problem for them to do so. Others could not give priority to the cultural sources and gave priority to the biblical text. But the good thing is that this, it shows a wide variety of black biblical scholarship, a wide variety of